going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. In today's episode, we're going to talk all about tomato blossoms. What is it that gets them to form? What is it that gets them to stay? And are there some things you can do to get them to stay even more frequently so you have even more tomatoes forming on your plants? Let's go. So when it comes to tomato blossoms, they're what's known as a perfect flower. That means there's both male and female components in the flower. So for every flower you get, you potentially can get a tomato. However, a lot of gardeners struggle with just getting more flowers. So we're going to talk about what you can do to get more flowers first, and then we'll talk about what you can do to get them to stay on your plant. So the first thing you can do as a gardener is picking a variety that has good genetics. There are certain tomato varieties that just genetically will give you more flowers. For instance, the red centiflora tomato is a prime example of this. Even under the worst case scenarios, that tomato is going to give us 10 to 15 times more flowers and fruit than, say, a tomato like a beefsteak will. And so by picking a plant with good genetics, you're going to guarantee yourself more tomatoes. Now, if you don't even like that tomato, if you're not a big cherry tomato fan, that's not going to do you a whole lot of good. So there's some things you can do to, even if you're growing a beefsteak tomato, you can guarantee a few more flowers. The second thing you can do to guaranteeing more flowers is by fertilizing properly. A lot of gardeners think that the more green their plant is, the healthier it's going to be, and subsequently the more fruit that they're going to get. That's actually not entirely true. You see, a tomato plant, if it is very healthy, will actually not prioritize fruit. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, okay, so is Luke saying that I need to have a sick plant? No, that's not what I'm saying. What you do need is a little bit of stress though. You see, stress is actually a good thing when it comes to getting fruit, because the only reason why a plant fruits is because it is stressed and it risks dying. And if it risks dying without producing seed, it risks the end of basically the genetic pool, right? So it's trying to create seeds through fruit production so that in hopes that a bird will come and eat the fruit and spread the seeds around. So stress is a good thing. And that's typically why you don't see a whole lot of fruit set and flower production in early season. When everything is going right, there's lots of water, lots of nutrients, and the temperatures are a little cooler. There's not a whole lot of stress there for the plant. But as the sun gets higher in the sky, it gets hotter, it gets drier, the plant uses up some of those nutrients in the soil, it starts to undergo some stress, and that's where you get a lot of your fruit set on your tomato plants. So when it comes to fertilizing, we keep things pretty simple here. You see, if the plant is really healthy and it's looking great, it's not encouraged to produce fruit. And what produces that beautiful green growth is lots of nitrogen. And so in the early season, we use Trifecta Plus, and it's just formulated this way, so it makes it very easy for us. But we use Trifecta Plus in the early season when we plant these plants. And we basically rely on that fast-acting nitrogen to get the plant to grow fast, get it established, and then once it's established, the nitrogen will basically kind of drop off slowly as the plant uses it. So come early June or so, there's not a whole lot of nitrogen left in that fertilizer, so it causes the plant to say, all right, what I had, I no longer have, so I need to kind of change gears a little bit and start setting fruit. Now, if you're not using Trifecta, just by dialing back the nitrogen is really all it's going to take to kind of set that into motion. If you're fertilizing on a weekly or a monthly basis, that's far too frequent, and your plant is not going to be encouraged to set that fruit. So typically what I say is look at your plant. If you're in mid-June and you have like 1 or 2 flowers, but your plant is already like 5 or 6 feet tall and it's super green, generally I'd say 9.9 times out of 10, like 99% of the time, it's going to be just too much fertility. And simply dialing that back or stopping altogether is going to be a great way to getting that plant to kind of start focusing on fruit production rather than more growth. All right, now the final thing with fertilizing actually has more to do with soil fertility than fertilizing itself. You see, these plants here, they're setting fruit and flowers because the soil is healthy, right? It's fertile. But part of fertility has less to do with nutrients and more to do with the overall soil quality itself. There's a huge umbrella of soil fertility, and only a small percentage of that has to do with the overall nutrients found in the soil. The soil quality itself has more to do with soil fertility than the nutrients does, believe it or not. That's another episode for another day, but I think it'd be really cool. So when you're looking at overall soil fertility, it has more to do with how well it drains, how well it holds on to moisture, how well it holds on to air, right? How well it holds on to the structure in the soil, how much organic material is in the soil. That has a lot to do with soil fertility. And so in soils that are very fertile, you have an environment that's going to hold on to the right amount of water. If your soil is very well draining, like too well draining, like if there's too much sand in it, your plants are going to dry out too fast. And there's a lot of gardeners that will say, okay, well, yeah, but if you're drying your soil out, you're letting your soil dry out, it's going to cause stress, and that stress is what you're looking for, right? Wrong. You see, you can dial water back slightly, but the plants still do need some water. And so if you dial the water back too much, what's going to happen is, yes, that stress will form more flowers. The problem is those flowers won't set because the plant is stressed. And so when the plant is stressed, it cannot possibly set all of that fruit because those fruits are 90 to 95% water. And if the plant cannot sustain a fully sized fruit with 90 to 95% water, it's going to actually cut off and sever those flowers and drop off the plant. And you're going to be left with spotty fruit set. That's why a lot of times trusses that are lower on the plant have more fruit set than trusses that are higher on the plant. That's because there's more access to water lower on the plant, and the fruits that set are set earlier, typically earlier in the season when there's more water in the soil. So as you go up, you typically have less fruit set, and that's simply because of a lack of water, and the plant is simply saying, I cannot sustain this fruit this high up with the amount of water that I have, so I'm going to drop off what I can. And so by dialing back the water or having poor quality soil is actually not a really good tactic to setting fruit. Same thing with heavy clay soil. If there's heavy clay soil, it'll hold on to way too much water, and then the roots are going to be very constricted for oxygen. The plant is overall not going to be able to uptake a lot of nutrients and be as healthy as possible. And so by having a really well-draining soil, but one that is high in organic material, a very fertile soil like what we have here, that is a ticket to having a lot of fruit and a lot of flower set. So once your plant is producing lots of flowers, the next thing is getting them to stay on the plant. And we get asked all the time why your plants will produce flowers, but then they'll drop off. Blossom drop can happen for a wide variety of reasons, and we'll talk about them. The first reason is because of environmental conditions, like I just talked about. You see, if the soil is too dry, the plant has no incentive to hold on to that fruit, and because it knows it can't hold on to that fruit, it'll basically just terminate that flower right away. And so a lot of times that's where you're going to lose your first flowers, is just due to kind of environmental stress. And I kind of look at fruit set almost like rings on a tree. Fun fact for you guys, people that cut down trees and actually count the rings can tell if the season that year was wet or if it was dry based on the thickness of the ring. Wetter years have larger rings because the plant grew faster. Well, very much you can look at kind of the season of the timeline of the tomato plant and the environmental conditions that it went through based on the fruit set. As I said, the lower fruits typically have a lot more success because of the fact there's better growing conditions, a lot more moisture, temperatures are a little more stable, and so you're going to have better fruit set. As you go up, you can see periods where there was flower or bud termination, and that results in either more fruit set or less fruit set, and that can tell you, okay, I had a good amount of rain here at this truss, I had a dry period at this truss, and it kind of helps you dial in your environmental conditions and knowing what your tomato likes, which is super cool. But also, another reason why your tomato plant might drop the blossoms is because it's, like I said, too hot, too dry, not enough water, but also a lack of calcium. You see, calcium is very important with fruit set. And you've probably heard the term blossom end rot. Blossom end rot occurs on the bottom of fruits, not just tomatoes. You can have it on squash, you can have it on eggplants, you can also have it on peppers. But basically, blossom end rot is the lack of calcium. Now, a lack of calcium doesn't mean you have to go out and fertilize with calcium. Sometimes it means you don't have enough water or infrequent watering because the plant uses water to uptake the calcium. That's why if the plant goes very dry for like 2 or 3 weeks and then it gets a lot of water, that infrequent watering will actually cause the plant to have blossom end rot because it couldn't get that calcium when the fruit was forming. But in the event that you are watering frequently and maybe you're using a soilless potting mix like you're growing in containers, that soil will sometimes be depleted in calcium. And in that instance, what you can do is you can use either dolomitic lime in small quantities, you can use wood ash in small quantities, or you can use something like bone meal. You could fertilize with trifecta if you wanted an all-purpose fertilizer, but bone meal has lots of calcium, as well as even things like crushed eggshells. But they're going to be slower to release, they will have some calcium, but you want to get that calcium into your soil because that has more to do with your fruit set. All right, the final thing you can do as a gardener to keeping more flowers on your plant is by using a spray like this. This is one of many different options available to you as a gardener, and this is produced by Bonide, not a sponsor, just something I've been using for years, and it's known as Blossom Set Spray. Essentially what this is a bottle of concentrated hormone. It's a naturally derived plant hormone that is a signal that the plant produces naturally. Think of it as like the smell of grass, right? When grass gets cut, that's actually a hormone. It's actually a stress hormone when you cut grass. That's where the scent of cut grass comes from. But these tomato blossoms actually give off a scent that's very, very slight. And when the plants have been successfully pollinated, that scent is given off to other pollinators in the area that says, I don't need to be pollinated anymore because I've been successfully set. And so that hormone is essentially bottled up in here in a concentrate. And what you do is you essentially spray that on to the plant. And what it does is it sends a signal to this plant here. I have successfully pollinated this blossom, and so it won't terminate it prematurely. You want to spray it typically a few days after the blossom opens, and then once you spray it on there, because of the fact that the tomato blossom is a self-fertile, perfect flower, like I said, it contains both male and female components, it actually doesn't really need to be pollinated. Most of the vibrations from the wind is enough to send pollen down into the female part of the flower from the male part, and it's almost successfully pollinated. So you don't even really need to do much, but simply waiting for that flower to open, putting a couple sprays of this on there isn't 100% successful, but it's going to increase your success rate by probably 50 to 75%. And so this is a great option. You can also make some of these sprays at home. There's lots of different recipes and stuff that exist, but we don't have enough time to get into all those today, but that is what Google is for. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you all learned something new. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have some friends that are growing tomatoes and you've been sitting with them at lunch and they say, well, my tomato plants just aren't setting as much fruit as I want, say, I got a video for you. Send this video to them. I'd really appreciate it. And until next episode, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you all learned something new. And remember to grow bigger. Take care.